Picture this. An Arleigh Burke-class destroyer holds station 300 miles west of Guam. Magazine full. Radar sweeping. Crew at routine watch. Everything looks exactly the way Deterrence is supposed to look. Then the passive sensors pick up something. A contact. Fast, low, sea skimming. And behind it, not one contact, not five. Dozens. The watch officer has seconds to decide whether this is a training echo or the opening move of something much larger. And here's the question hanging over the entire Pacific right now, when that moment comes. When the Aegis system lights up and the fire control computer starts assigning intercept solutions, does the ship have enough missiles in the vertical launch cells to finish the fight? And more importantly, does the Navy have the budget to put them back afterward? That is not a tactical question. It is a financial one. And in the summer of 2025, with defense appropriations stalled, senior leadership billets sitting empty, and resupply timelines stretching out across months at sea, it is the most honest question anyone can ask about American naval power in the Pacific. We are going to walk through the readiness scenario, minute by minute, system by system. We are going to show you exactly how the Arleigh Burke and its Aegis combat system hold the line against a combined anti-ship missile and drone swarm attack. And then we are going to show you the number that changes everything. Not the kill count, the price tag behind it. Start with the geography. The Western Pacific is not a pond. It is an ocean. 4,000 miles of open water between the American coast and the first island chain, and another 1,000 miles beyond that to the Chinese mainland. The U.S. Navy's forward posture in this space is built around carrier strike groups, each anchored by a nuclear-powered carrier and escorted by a screen of Arleigh Burke destroyers. Those destroyers are the outermost layer of the shield. They sit on the picket line, ahead of the carrier, absorbing the first wave of any incoming attack, so the carrier and its air wing survive to fight back. The threat those destroyers face has changed dramatically in the last decade. It used to be that a peer adversary needed a sophisticated submarine or a complex strike package of manned aircraft to threaten a carrier group. That calculus no longer holds. The People's Liberation Army Navy has invested deeply and publicly in what strategists call the anti-access, area denial architecture, a layered kill chain designed to find, fix, track, and strike American surface ships before they can get close enough to matter. At the center of that architecture are ballistic anti-ship missiles, the DF-21D and the DF-26, designed to strike ships at ranges exceeding 1,500 kilometers. Around them sits a web of reconnaissance satellites, over-the-horizon radar, and submarine-launched torpedoes. And at the outer edge, increasingly, are drone swarms and long-range cruise missiles. Cheaper, expendable, and capable of overwhelming a ship's point defenses through sheer volume. The Arleigh Burke is designed to fight exactly this fight, but it is designed to fight it once, at full magazine. What happens on the second fight, or the third, is where the budget question bites. Let us build the scenario. The destroyer. Call her USS Fitzgerald for this run, though the scenario applies to any Burke-class hull, has been on station for 11 days. She carries 96 Mark 41 vertical launch cells. Some of those cells hold Tomahawk cruise missiles for strike. Some hold anti-submarine rockets. The cells allocated to air defense hold a mix of SM-2 standard missiles for medium-range intercepts and SM-6 extended-range interceptors for the long shots. Total air defense capacity in a fully loaded Burke, roughly 60 cells. Against a sophisticated adversary, those 60 cells are the entire air defense budget for whatever engagement unfolds. The scenario begins at 0347 local time, a Chinese-type 055 destroyer, the Renhai class, the most capable surface combatant in the planned fleet, has been tracking the strike group from beyond the radar horizon for 6 hours. At 0347, it goes active. Simultaneously, a salvo of YJ-18A anti-ship cruise missiles launches from a submarine contact that the carrier group's helicopters have been hunting for 2 days without success. 8 missiles. Subsonic outbound, then supersonic terminal phase. Sea skimming, radar guided, maneuvering on final approach. Behind the missiles, 30 seconds later, the drone swarm launches from 2 fast surface vessels that have been loitering at the edge of the exclusion zone under the cover of a fishing fleet. 40 drones. Not sophisticated individually. These are loitering munitions, essentially cheap one-way aircraft with shaped charges, but launched in a coordinated wave designed to saturate the ship's fire control radar by presenting more simultaneous targets than it can engage. This is the geometry that keeps Navy planners awake at night. A ship with 60 intercept-capable cells, 8 fast cruise missiles on one vector, 40 drones on a second vector, and the fire control system has to sequence engagements across both tracks simultaneously because the drones are a decoy. Their job is to pull intercept missiles away from the more lethal cruise missile salvo. Put yourself in the Combat Information Center for a moment. Every console is lit. Every track is assigned. The ship's AN/SPY 1D phased array radar is painting every contact simultaneously, feeding firing solutions to the Aegis weapons system in real time. The watch officer does not have the luxury of thinking sequentially. The system thinks for her. Here is the complication that changes the math. 2 days ago, USS Fitzgerald expended 14 SM-2 interceptors in a live-fire exercise, a scheduled, planned training event, exactly the kind of realistic training the Navy uses to maintain crew proficiency. The exercise went well. The crew hit 11 of 14 simulated targets. By any training metric, a strong performance. But those 14 cells are now empty, and the resupply ship that would normally reload them, USNS Matthew Perry, a Lewis and Clark-class dry cargo ship, is still in Yokosuka. She is waiting on a parts delivery that was delayed because a contractor budget dispute froze procurement on a specific lot of launcher components. 60 cells minus 14 empty cells equals 46 intercept rounds available at the moment the real-world scenario opens, against 8 fast cruise missiles and 40 drones. The math is still workable, but it has a margin, and that margin shrinks the moment anything goes wrong. Let us run the engagement clock. Contact declared at 0347. Fire control radar locks within 4 seconds. The Aegis system begins computing intercept solutions before the watch officer calls the first order. The doctrine for a saturating attack is layered engagement. You do not wait for threats to reach you. You shoot early, at maximum range, to reduce the number of contacts you have to deal with up close where your options narrow. The SM-6 is built for this. It has a range of over 250 kilometers in surface-to-air mode, active radar homing on terminal phase, and it can engage targets at low altitude. Sea-skimming missiles included. At maximum range engagement, you have time for 2 shots per target before it closes to CIWS range. 1 for confidence, 1 for insurance. The fire control computer makes the call. First salvo. 6 SM-6 interceptors away, targeting the lead 4 cruise missiles at maximum range. The missiles leave the vertical launch cells in a ripple. 2 seconds between each launch, deck vibrating, exhaust venting, then silence as the rockets climb and turn north-northwest. At this range, intercept is 70 to 90 seconds out. Simultaneously, the CIWS, the Phalanx Block 1B, a 20mm Gatling gun that fires at 4,500 rounds per minute, slews to the drone bearing and begins tracking. The Phalanx does not wait for a command. Once its own fire control radar designates a track as hostile, it shoots. Range is limited, roughly 2 kilometers. But against the drone swarm at medium altitude, it is the last line. The problem is sequencing. The Phalanx can engage 1 track at a time in burst mode. 40 drones, even at a generous engagement rate of 1 every 3 seconds, takes 2 minutes to work through. 2 minutes at drone approach speed means the leading elements of the swarm will be inside the CIWS engagement envelope while the gun is still shooting at the ones further back. This is where BLOK A enters, the first real obstacle. At 0351, 4 minutes into the engagement, the ship's secondary fire control radar, the SPG-62 Illuminator, drops off the network for 40 seconds due to a software fault in a recently installed patch. For those 40 seconds, 3 SM-6 missiles in flight lose their mid-course update link. They do not go blind. The missiles carry their own active seeker. But without mid-course correction, their intercept geometry against maneuvering targets degrades. 2 of the 3 still hit. The third misses by 40 meters. The crew catches the fault, manually resets the illuminator, and restores the link. 40 seconds of disruption. But in an engagement that runs 4 minutes start to finish, 40 seconds is not a footnote. It is a third of the critical window. The first wave is not the hard part. The hard part is what the missed intercept means for the rest of the engagement. Because a cruise missile that survives to close range is now a fundamentally different problem than one destroyed at distance. At 0352, 5 minutes in, the tactical picture has evolved. Of the 8 incoming cruise missiles, 6 are destroyed by SM-6 intercepts, 4 at long range, 2 more by a second salvo of SM-2 at medium range. 1 was destroyed by a defensive maneuver. The ship turned hard, and the missile lost lock in the turn, flew past, and self-destructed 2 kilometers astern. The 8th missile is still inbound. 6 SM-6 expended, 4 SM-2 expended. 10 cells gone in 5 minutes. The 8th missile, AYJ-18A in its terminal supersonic phase, is now at 7 kilometers and closing at Mach 3. Time to impact, 8 seconds. The Phalanx is already slewing from the drone track. It locks. It fires. The gun puts 900 rounds downrange in the 2-second burst. The YJ, 18A comes apart at 400 meters. Fragments spray across the bow wave. The ship takes minor topside damage. An antenna radome cracked, a ventilation intake perforated, but the hull is intact, propulsion is intact, and the Aegis radar is intact. Meanwhile, the drone swarm has been absorbed. Of 40 drones, 31 were destroyed by phalanx. 6 turned back when their data link to the launching vessels was severed by electronic countermeasures. 2 impacted the water short of the ship after maneuvering errors, and 1 struck the ship, but at a glancing angle on the aft deckhouse with insufficient mass to penetrate the hull. Damage, superficial. Casualties, none aboard. By 0356, the engagement is over. 9 minutes from first contact to all clear. What does the magazine look like afterward? 6 SM-6 interceptors expended. 4 SM-2 interceptors expended. Phalanx rounds, approximately 12,000, standard for a swarm engagement of this size. Total air defense cells used, 10 of 46 available. 36 remain. Here is where most tactical briefings stop. The ship won. The carrier is protected. The crew performed exactly as trained. By every tactical metric, this was a successful defense. But here is what the tactical briefing does not say. One SM-6 interceptor costs approximately $4.1 million. 6 fired, $24.6 million. One SM-2 costs approximately $2.2 million. 4 fired, $8.8 million. Phalanx ammunition, 20mm rounds, runs approximately $30 per round, 12,000 rounds, $360,000. Total expenditure for 9 minutes of defensive combat, just over $33 million. The swarm that forced that expenditure, 40 loitering munitions, each costing an estimated $20,000 to $80,000, represented a total threat investment of perhaps $2 million at the low end. Think about what that ratio means. The defending ship spent roughly $15 for every $1 the attacker spent. The ship won the engagement. But the attacker can sustain that exchange rate far longer than the defender can. Here is the part that seems backward on the surface, and yet it is the central logic of modern naval warfare. The United States Navy operates the most capable surface combatant fleet in the world. Its sensors, its software, its training pipelines, its weapons. All are a generation ahead of any potential adversary in raw performance terms. And yet the economic structure of the threat it faces creates a compounding problem that performance alone cannot solve. I spent a significant amount of time going through the publicly available budget documents and Naval Institute analyses on this, and one figure kept coming back. The Navy's estimate that a fully equipped Arleigh Burke costs approximately $2 billion to build. A single YJ-18A anti-ship cruise missile, the weapon this ship just defeated, costs roughly $3 million. A single Type 055 destroyer carries enough anti-ship missiles to force a defending Burke to expend the majority of its SM-6 inventory in one engagement. And when those cells are empty, the ship cannot reload at sea. It has to return to port. What's most surprising about the budget crunch facing the Navy right now isn't the headline number. It's where the cuts land. Procurement of new SM-6 rounds has been held up by appropriations delays. Maintenance windows for destroyers have been extended because repair facilities are waiting on contractor funding. And some of the senior billets that coordinate cross-service logistics, the people who decide which resupply ship goes where and when, have been sitting vacant for months because confirmation processes have stalled. The destroyer won the fight, but the fight cost $33 million and 10 vertical launch cells, and the resupply ship is still in Yokosuka. That is the scenario that matters. Not whether Aegis can shoot down a missile. It can. Not whether Phalanx can chew through a drone swarm. It can. The question is whether the logistics chain behind the shield is funded, staffed, and positioned to reload before the next wave. Let us talk about the supply problem concretely, because this is where the abstract budget debate becomes a physical constraint. The Navy maintains a network of ammunition supply ships, combat logistics, force vessels, primarily the Lewis and Clark-class dry cargo and ammunition ships, tasked with underway replenishment of guided missile destroyers and cruisers at sea. These ships carry SM-6 rounds, SM-2 rounds, and Tomahawk missiles in standard transport canisters designed to reload the Mark 41 vertical launch system without returning to port. The replenishment process is not fast. Transferring vertical launch canisters at sea requires the two ships to hold formation at close range, typically 50 to 100 feet, in what is called a connected replenishment evolution. Each canister weighs several hundred pounds. Transfer times for a full combat reload run 6 to 8 hours under good conditions. In heavy seas, the evolution is suspended. On paper, this means a Burke that has expended 10 cells in a defensive engagement can be reloaded within 12 hours of rendezvous with a supply ship. In practice, in a contested area where submarine threats exist and the supply ship itself has minimal self-defense capability, that 12-hour window represents serious vulnerability. You cannot hold station near a resupply ship in a submarine threat environment without significantly increasing the tactical risk to both vessels. The deeper problem is industrial. SM-6 missiles are produced at a rate that was sufficient for peacetime inventory maintenance. It is not sufficient for sustained combat expenditure. The missiles are made by Raytheon at a facility in Huntsville, Alabama. Production capacity is estimated at roughly 500 missiles per year. A single carrier strike group, in a sustained high-intensity campaign, could expend that entire annual production run in a matter of weeks. This is not a classified number. The Congressional Research Service has flagged it. The Government Accountability Office has flagged it. Multiple retired flag officers have testified about it. The production rate is a known constraint, and increasing it requires long lead investments in manufacturing capacity, tooling, workforce, supply chains that take years to build out. Here's what most analysts bury in a footnote. The U.S. Navy's procurement system is optimized for budget cycles, not for surge capacity, when appropriations are delayed, as they were repeatedly in the 2024 and 2025 budget cycles. The first things that get deferred are the things that take longest to notice, not operations, not people, procurement. And procurement is where missile stocks live. One detail that stuck with us in reviewing the historical pattern. During the 1991 Gulf War, the Navy burned through Tomahawk inventories so fast that the production line had to be surged on emergency contracts. The lesson was noted. It was analyzed. It was written into doctrine. And 30 years later, the structural vulnerability it identified, production rates that trail potential expenditure rates, still has not been fully solved. Here is the take that is going to get us some pushback in the comments. The United States Navy does not have a weapons problem. It has a prioritization problem. Every year, Congress debates the top-line number for the defense budget, and every year, the debate is dominated by platforms. New ships, new aircraft, new carriers. Because platforms are visible, platforms have constituencies, platforms photograph well at commissioning ceremonies. Missile stocks are not visible. A full magazine looks exactly the same as an empty one from the outside. The political incentive to maintain deep interceptor inventories is structurally weaker than the incentive to cut the ribbon on a new destroyer, and that asymmetry has consequences that show up not in peacetime reviews, but in the opening hours of a real engagement. The Navy is not alone in this. Every major military has the same distortion. But in the Pacific, where distances are vast and resupply, times are long, the gap between visible capability and sustainable capability is especially exposed. So here's the honest question, and we genuinely want your read on this in the comments. Does a Navy win a sustained Pacific campaign by stocking more expensive interceptors, or by developing tactics that reduce the cost per intercept? Because those are genuinely different strategies, and the choice between them shapes procurement decisions worth tens of billions of dollars. Let us look at what the Navy is actually doing in response to this constraint, because the answer is not simply spend more money. The first response is layering. Doctrine increasingly emphasizes that the SM-6 and SM-2 are not the first line of defense against cheap threats. They are the last resort against the threats that actually matter. Electronic warfare, decoys, and active jamming are supposed to degrade incoming missile guidance before the intercept layer engages. If electronic countermeasures can cause a YJ-188 to lose lock or a drone to lose data link, you have defeated that threat for the cost of electricity. No cells expended. The Navy has invested significantly in the AN/SLQ-32 electronic warfare system and its successors, specifically to expand this layer. Newer variants are designed to jam drone swarm communications, cutting the coordinating link between drones that allows them to operate as a coherent formation, which turns a coordinated 40-drone assault into 40 individual uncoordinated missiles, a much easier problem for the phalanx to work through sequentially. The second response is directed energy. The Navy has been testing the high-energy laser with integrated optical dazzler and surveillance. Helios, mounted on modified Arleigh Burke destroyers. The system uses a high-powered laser to physically destroy drones and small surface targets. Operating cost per engagement. Essentially the cost of the electricity to power the laser, measured in dollars per shot rather than millions per shot. The problem is range and weather dependency. Current solid-state laser systems are effective at short ranges, inside 5 kilometers, and degrade significantly in rain, fog, and sea spray. Against a drone swarm that begins its terminal run at 10 kilometers, the laser engages the trailing elements while Phalanx and SM-2 are still working the leaders. It is an additional layer, not a replacement. The third response is networking. The Navy's cooperative engagement capability allows one ship's radar to feed targeting data to another ship's weapons. In a carrier strike group scenario, this means a Burke on the picket line can illuminate a target, and a second Burke further back can shoot the intercept, distributing the magazine load across multiple hulls rather than exhausting a single ship's cells. It also means the carrier's air wing becomes part of the defensive equation. An F/A-18 Super Hornet carrying AIM-120 AMRAAM missiles can prosecute air targets at range, offloading the ship's vertical launch cells for the most demanding threats. But here's the second obstacle in this scenario, and it hit at the worst possible time. At 0344, 3 minutes before the missile salvo launched, the lead F/A-18 Super Hornet of the Carrier Air Wing's Alert 5 package, 2 jets on deck, engines cold, pilot strapped in, experienced a hydraulic fault on the lead aircraft that grounded it. The Alert 5 wingman launched solo. One jet against a saturating attack is a screening contribution, not a solution. The pilot took 2 long-range shots with AIM-120 extended-range missiles, destroyed 2 drones, and then egressed to minimum fuel before the main engagement wave closed. 2 drones taken off the board. Better than nothing. But the missing second aircraft, the one that would have taken the 4-kilometer approach angle where the swarm was most compressed, left a gap that Phalanx had to cover alone. The hydraulic fault was a routine maintenance issue, discoverable on pre-flight. In the operational tempo of an 11-day deployment, the inspection cycle had been stretched by 12 hours due to crew rest requirements. The crew was managing a maintenance backlog because the carrier's maintenance department was short 2 experienced aviation hydraulics technicians. Positions that had been unfilled for 60 days because the schools that trained them were running at 70% capacity due to an instructor shortage. A hydraulic fault tracing back to a training pipeline that traced back to an instructor shortage that traced back to a budget decision about schoolhouse funding. Every link in that chain is real. Every link is mundane. And together they put 1 fewer jet in the air at exactly the wrong moment. The ship still won. The crew covered the gap. But the gap was there. And the reason it was there was not a failure of courage, or training, or technology. It was a failure of sustained investment in the unglamorous infrastructure that keeps the visible capability running. What strikes us about this scenario is not the weapon's performance. That part held up, as it was designed to. What strikes us is how many points of vulnerability trace back not to the threat's sophistication, but to the defender's resource constraints. And those constraints are choices. They are the accumulated result of years of budget negotiations, procurement deferrals, and institutional decisions about what gets funded and what gets deferred. The Navy has spent the last decade winning the argument that it needs more ships. It has been less successful at winning the argument that those ships need full magazines, maintained at high readiness, supported by an industrial base capable of reloading them faster than a peer adversary can expend them. Now step back from the engagement and look at what this means at the strategic level. The U.S. Navy's deterrence posture in the Pacific rests on a simple premise. Any adversary considering an attack on American forces or American allies has to calculate that the attack will fail, and that the cost of attempting it will be prohibitive. That calculation works when the defending fleet has enough magazine depth to sustain multiple engagements, enough logistics support to reload between engagements, and enough trained crew to maintain operational tempo across weeks or months of sustained tension. If any of those legs weakens, magazine depth, logistics, or crew, the deterrence calculation changes. Not necessarily in ways that are visible from the outside. The ship still looks the same. The radar is still sweeping. The flag is still flying. But the commander on the other side, if she has good intelligence, knows something that the photograph does not show. The People's Liberation Army Navy has been explicit in its public doctrine about this. The planned strategy for a Western Pacific campaign does not assume it will destroy the U.S. Navy in a single decisive engagement. It assumes it will attrite American combat power over time, forcing expenditure of interceptor stocks, extending maintenance cycles, stretching logistics chains, until the tactical balance tips. The DF-21D and DF-26 anti-ship ballistic missiles are part of this logic. They are not designed purely to sink ships. They are designed to force American carriers to operate beyond the range of their air wings, which reduces the effective striking power of the carrier group without sinking a single ship. The Type 055 destroyer, the Fujian carrier, the submarine fleet. All are components of a system designed to make the Western Pacific expensive for American forces to operate in. Not necessarily more expensive than the U.S. can afford in absolute terms. More expensive than the U.S. has been willing to fund in recent budget cycles. That gap between what deterrence requires and what appropriations have provided is precisely what a budget crunch tests. And it is why the number of empty VLS cells aboard USS Fitzgerald after a 9-minute defensive engagement is a more important data point than the kill count, Will Team stock more interceptors or Team develop cheaper counter-swarm tactics win this argument in the next defense budget cycle? Drop your take in the comments. Because this debate is actively happening in the halls of the Pentagon right now, and the answer shapes how the Navy fights in the 2030s. Here's what this tells us about the current state of American naval power in the Pacific. The technology works. Let that be the baseline. Aegis is not a flawed system waiting to be exposed. The SM-6 is not an overpriced liability. The Arleigh Burke hull is a mature, tested, well-understood platform with a track record spanning 3 decades of real-world operations. The crews are trained. The doctrine is sound. When the scenario runs, even with the obstacles, even with the hydraulic fault and the software glitch and the resupply ship still in port, the ship holds the line. That matters. It matters more than any single procurement decision, because the foundation of deterrence is credibility, and credibility requires that the system actually function when tested. Aegis functions. The crews that operate it are the most experienced in the world at this particular problem set. No potential adversary has their equivalent. But the system has a seam. The seam runs through the logistics chain, through the production rates, through the appropriations process, through the instructor shortage at the hydraulic school. These are not exciting vulnerabilities. They do not generate dramatic headlines. They do not appear in the threat briefings that drive congressional attention toward platform procurement. They appear in the math. $33 million per 9-minute engagement against a threat that costs $2 million to build. A production rate of 500 SM-6 missiles per year against a potential sustained expenditure rate that could exceed that in weeks. A resupply ship in Yokosuka, waiting on a parts delivery while the ship it is supposed to reload holds station 300 miles from Guam. The open question is whether the Navy can close that seam within the constraints of realistic defense budgets, or whether the seam itself becomes the adversary's strategy. There is a binary prediction worth making here. If the Navy invests the next defense cycle in magazine depth and logistics infrastructure rather than additional hulls, the deterrence equation strengthens measurably by 2030. If it does not, the ships the Navy is building now will arrive at their stations with exactly the vulnerability this scenario illustrates. Comment YES if you think the budget will follow the logistics argument, and no if you think platform procurement wins again, because history has a track record here, and it is not encouraging. The Arleigh Burke holds its Pacific picket, radar sweeping. Magazine, for now, full. The Aegis combat system has proven, in exercise after exercise, in doctrine review after doctrine review, that it can handle the threat. The math of the intercept works. The technology is real. The question that outlasts this deployment, and every deployment after it, is simpler and harder than any radar equation. Does the budget behind the shield match the threat in front of it? Because the shield only matters if it can hold past the first wave, and past the second, and past the third. The next time we look at how the U.S. Carrier Strike Group manages the distance problem, how a formation that has to hold position in a missile threat envelope still projects power forward, we will see how the aviation layer connects to exactly this readiness question. The answer is not what most people expect. If you want to understand the full picture of American naval power in the Pacific, the part that does not appear in commissioning photographs, stay with us.